Welcome to Business Recipe. Every business has a recipe. Here's theirs. Today's recipe: the instruction your boss never has to give. On November 5th, 1992, ADM executive Mark Whitacre called the FBI and confessed his company was fixing prices with its competitors. 30 years later, a different ADM executive faced different investigators. This time, the company wasn't fixing prices. It was fixing its own numbers, and nobody had to say a word. This is the recipe for how a company gets what it wants, without asking. This is not a story about history repeating. It's a story about one decision a board of directors made in 2020, a decision that told 7 executives exactly how many dollars they'd earn if a single division hit a single number. ADM's board built that incentive. ADM's own executives followed it. And when the number turned out to be manufactured, the Department of Justice walked away without filing a single charge. Here's the recipe: who built the incentive, how the number got made, what came out of the oven when regulators finally opened the door, and exactly who paid for it. And before we're done, we're going back to Mark Whitacre. Because you can't understand what ADM built in 2020 until you understand what it already knew in 1995. Every recipe starts with what's already in the kitchen. By 1989, Archer Daniels Midland already called itself Supermarket to the world, a commodity processor that today pulls in more than $93 billion a year, turning crops into animal feed and sweeteners. That year, the company recruited a 32-year-old Cornell-trained biochemist named Mark Whitacre to run a brand-new bioproducts division out of Decatur, Illinois. He was the youngest divisional president in ADM's history, tasked with building the world's largest lysine plant, lysine being an amino acid added to livestock feed. Whitacre rose fast inside a specific culture. On one of the FBI tapes he would later help make, ADM's own president, James Randall, was recorded telling a room of executives the company's real motto: "Our competitors are our friends. Our customers are the enemy." That wasn't a slogan on a wall. It was an operating instruction, and it ran to the top. Chairman Dwayne Andreas's own son, Michael, sat one rung down as vice chairman. This wasn't a rogue department. By 1992, ADM was secretly meeting with lysine producers from Japan and South Korea to fix prices, a scheme that would eventually cost the company a $100 million criminal fine, the largest antitrust penalty in American history at the time. Fast forward to 2020. A different ingredient enters the kitchen. Not a person, a formula. That year, ADM's Compensation and Succession Committee rewrote how it paid its top executives. Half of every senior leader's long-term stock award would now depend on one thing: how fast the nutrition segment, vitamins, probiotics, plant-based protein, a division worth less than a tenth of ADM's total revenue, grew its operating profit. Hit 10% average annual growth over 3 years, get your target payout. Hit 20%, get double. The ingredients were on the counter. A culture that already knew how to hit a number by any means necessary. And a brand new formula that told 7 people exactly what that number was worth. Here's the method, and here's the part that makes it different from 1995. Nobody needed a wire this time. They needed a spreadsheet. In January 2020, the same year the board approved the new pay formula, ADM promoted Vikram Luthar to Chief Financial Officer of the nutrition segment. 2 years later, he was promoted again to CFO of the entire company. The SEC's complaint, filed in January 2026, alleges that when nutrition's numbers came in short of target for fiscal 2021 and 2022, Luthar directed what the agency called adjustments, retroactive rebates and price changes routed through ADM's other divisions, dressed up as ordinary intersegment trade. In the SEC's own words, when the numbers came up short, Luthar allegedly used ADM's other divisions as, quote, nutrition's piggybank to close the shortfall. Luthar has denied every allegation. Through his attorneys, he says he reasonably relied on the accountants and auditors around him, and he's contesting the case in federal court in Illinois. This one hasn't been settled. 2 other executives above him, former nutrition president Vince McChalky and former ADM CFO Ray Young, did settle, agreeing to pay a combined sum of roughly $1.2 million without admitting or denying wrongdoing. Meanwhile, ADM's public filings kept insisting these intersegment sales were priced at, quote, amounts approximating market. Regulators would later find that true in the paperwork and false in practice. The earliest version of the maneuver, rebates worth millions, dated back to 2018, 2 years before the new pay formula even existed. If the incentive was the ingredient, this was the method. And a method like this only shows up in the fiscal year it finally breaks. What came out of the oven on January 22, 2024, was the worst single trading day for ADM stock since 1929. Shares fell 24% in hours after the company disclosed it was investigating certain intersegment transactions inside nutrition, delayed its earnings, and put CFO Vikram Luthar on administrative leave. He resigned 8 months later. ADM cycled through 2 more CFOs in 6 months before settling on a third, hired from outside the company. For the next 2 years, prosecutors from the Southern District of New York built a criminal case, reportedly pulling grand jury testimony from more than 36 current and former ADM employees. Then, on January 27, 2026, the same day the SEC announced its $40 million civil penalty against ADM, the Justice Department closed its criminal investigation. No charges, no explanation offered publicly. ADM settled without admitting or denying the SEC's findings. When the restatement was finished, the company had erased $228 million of nutrition operating profit that had been booked and bonused between 2018 and 2023. CEO Juan Luciano called it, in his own words, a chance to put these matters behind the company and pointed to new internal controls. By every formal measure available, the case was closed. Before we go further, the strongest case for the other side, because it exists and it deserves the full argument. First, intersegment pricing is one of the murkiest corners of accounting. Reasonable accountants disagree about what counts as approximating market when one division is selling to another inside the same company. Luthar's defense is that he leaned on qualified professionals, internal and external, and that's not an unreasonable thing for a CFO to say. And consider this, the Justice Department spent 2 years, talked to 36+ witnesses under oath, and still walked away without filing one criminal charge. That's not nothing. That's a federal prosecutor's office looking hard for a crime and not finding one it could prove. Second, ADM's own compensation committee reviewed the restated numbers under its clawback policy and concluded no executive owed the company money back. The restatement, they found, didn't actually change whether any bonus target had been met. If the board that built the incentive says the incentive didn't cause a false outcome, maybe the mechanism story is too clean. Here's the problem with both arguments. A civil regulator doesn't need to prove a crime beyond reasonable doubt, only that investors were misled. The SEC met that bar well enough that 2 executives personally agreed to pay rather than contest it. And the clawback committee wasn't the only body to review the timeline. A federal judge did too, in the shareholder lawsuit still moving through discovery, and found that 2 years after the accounting practice began, the company changed its pay formula to reward it, a sequence the court said plausibly suggests a motive to at least maintain the fraudulent practice. The people who built the incentive are not the right judges of whether it worked. Now for the turn. In 1995, ADM's fraud required a conspiracy. Competitors on the phone, hotel rooms with hidden cameras. It needed people willing to break the law together, which meant people willing to talk. That gave the FBI its opening, and Mark Whitacre his role. The 2020s version needed none of that. It needed one internal formula, one segment under pressure, and executives adjusting their own company's books. No phone calls to intercept, no hotel room to wire. Just a compensation plan doing exactly the job a compensation plan is designed to do, telling people what the company actually values. ADM's board didn't order anyone to falsify numbers. It didn't have to. It just made one number worth $72 million and let human nature take it from there. This is why this channel exists, to find the incentive before the headline does. If that's useful to you, subscribe. Let's return to Mark Whitacre from the top of this video. He didn't walk into that FBI office entirely on his own. His wife, Ginger, had already decided she'd report the price fixing herself if he wouldn't. She was the sole reason I opened up to the FBI that night, Whitacre said years later. Ginger is the real whistleblower of this case, not I. For that, and for the $9.5 million he separately embezzled from ADM while wearing the wire, Whitacre served 8.5 years in federal prison. The wire he wore helped convict a vice chairman of the company and produced, at the time, the largest criminal antitrust fine in American history. He lost his freedom. Ginger bore the strain of the wire, the trial, the years after. And he lost his whistleblower immunity the moment investigators found his own theft. Compare that to 2026. Vince Maciocchi and Ray Young, the two executives who ran and financed this division, settled for about $1.2 million combined against a $72 million payday, without admitting wrongdoing. Vikram Luthar denies everything and is still fighting in court. Nobody involved has spent a single day in prison. And the people actually paying for it are on the other side of a pension statement, retirement funds like the National Elevator Industry Pension Fund, suing in federal court on behalf of elevator mechanics who will never meet a single ADM executive. ADM didn't fail to learn the lesson of 1995. It learned the wrong one. Don't stop rewarding the number. Just stop leaving a wire around to prove it. 3 signs this pattern is bigger than one company. Sign 1. When a board ties half of long-term pay to a single growth number in a division that's a tenth of total revenue, that's not diversification of incentives. And nutrition's actual growth came in at 21.4%, just enough to clear the ceiling. Recall the formula from the top of this story: 10% for target, 20 for double. That's not alignment. That's an instruction timed to a 3-year vesting clock. Sign 2. Watch the language and watch who gets promoted into the job that controls it. ADM's filing said intersegment sales were priced at amounts approximating market, right up until regulators said otherwise. And the executive the SEC says exploited that language was, a few months earlier, promoted to be the one person most responsible for policing it. When the fox's promotion is to guard the henhouse, read the footnote twice. Sign 3. Check what the penalty actually cost against what the number was worth. ADM paid $40 million to settle. Its executives kept the vast majority of $72 million in stock. No criminal charges, no clawback. When a fine is smaller than the bonus it was chasing, it isn't a deterrent, it's a fee. None of this required a genius. It required a spreadsheet, a 3-year clock, and nobody in the room willing to be the next Mark Whitacre. You're not looking for a rogue executive. You're looking for whoever wrote the bonus formula. Mark Whitacre is not in prison anymore. He's the chief science officer at Cypress Ingredients, a biotech company in California funding research into childhood malnutrition. On the opposite side of the same industry that once paid him to fix the price of an animal feed additive. He's spoken about it in churches and business schools for almost 20 years now. He calls it losing his moral compass. He doesn't call himself a hero. ADM is still one of the largest agricultural processors on Earth. Juan Luciano is still CEO. The stock recovered. The nutrition segment still exists, smaller and quieter than the board once promised investors it would be. And Vikram Luthar's case is still open, still contested, still waiting on a judge in Illinois. Nobody wore a wire this time. Nobody had to. If this is the kind of mechanism you want explained before the headline catches up, subscribe to Business Recipe. Next time, a company that figured out how to get the federal government to pay full price for its own product, then quietly charged everyone else less. Today's recipe, complete. So, what business should we crack open next? Drop the company name in the comments. We read them. If you want more case studies like this one, subscribe. New recipe every Tuesday.